What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. Now, if you watched last night's game against the Boston Bruins, you would have seen the Toronto Maple Leafs defeat them 6-4, but what you would have noticed, especially towards the end of the game, is that the Toronto Maple Leafs ended up playing that one, finishing it out with only 4 defensemen on the bench. Now, this resulted obviously from Justin Holl taking a puck to the head, in which we saw him bleeding from. No fault of the Boston Bruins. These things happen. We hope Justin Holl is okay. We'll be able to recover. We'll be able to bounce back. Nonetheless, a scary incident. The second one being Ilya Lyubushkin leaving the game in the second period and not returning after a sucker punch from Taylor Hall. Now, I will get into what happened, maybe why the fine that was handed out was, or why there was no suspension, why there should have been, whatever. But I guess the bigger argument that I'm going to get here in all of this is going to be the lack of consistency from NHL Department of Player Safety. This is obviously a Leafs channel. I understand that. With Taylor Hall's name being in the title of this video, I can completely understand Boston Bruins fans ending up here, and people are going to defend him and defend the play. I get that. I'm not going to get overly into the specifics of how hard or how soft the punch was, whether or not Lyubushkin should or should not have been injured. I get it. I get everyone's going to have differing opinions. My biggest gripe with the entire situation is not necessarily regarding the specific one-off incident of Taylor Hall doing this. My biggest problem here is the lack of consistency from Department of Player Safety. How and what can we expect from them going forward? Who in their right minds can look at a play that happens on the ice at this point and just be able to determine what the result of it is going to be, whether or not they are going to get kicked out, if they're going to get a penalty, even just within games, just minor penalties that go on. It has become so lost, so confusing in all of this. The NHL and their ability to officiate and be able to handle games, manage players' safety, which is the ultimate concern here, has got lost in the shuffle of everything going on. And now, regardless of what you think about the incident with Taylor Hall here, I think there's one thing most, if not all, of hockey fans can agree on here. George Parros has been absolutely terrible at his job. He's been terrible. This is a guy that was brought in because he was a tough guy. He was a fighter. He's supposed to understand these things. He's supposed to be able to mitigate it. He was the guy that goes out on the ice and enforces penalties and enforces things on other players when the refs don't do so themselves. You'd think that from that situation, maybe there would be a sense of common knowledge or just consistency from him to be able to look at a play and know what is right and what is wrong, and it is very evident at this point. He has no idea. So let's get into last night's incident. Taylor Hall is fined a maximum of $5,000 under the CBA, the maximum allowable, for a rough to Ilya Lyubushkin. Regardless of if you think he should be suspended or not, this is a very interesting way to determine this. Roughing, $5,000. The guy got a 2-minute penalty on the play. $5,000 is not a penalty after the fact. In fact, $5,000 to Taylor Hall is 0.00111% of his salary this season. The NHL may as well have not fined him at all. Now, if you didn't see the play, Ilya Lyubushkin hits Taylor Hall alongside the boards, and if you want to debate that it was a boarding or a hit from behind, whatever, feel free to do so. I'm not going to speculate on that. My personal opinion was that Taylor Hall was skating into him. He does ultimately turn his back. I don't think it was a boarding. If you want to call it a hit from behind, go ahead. He does connect with the side/back of Taylor Hall as he was turning, but I think that the result is that Taylor Hall, as he was spinning, ends up spinning into the boards. Taylor Hall gets up without a stick, though, and this is where it becomes a problem. He follows a defenseless player and swings around the side and hits him. That is a sucker punch. I don't care how hard or how soft you think it is. That is a sucker punch. The NHL, Rule 46.15, has written and stated very, very, very clearly, a match penalty shall be assessed to any player who punches an unsuspecting or unwilling opponent, in brackets, i.e. sucker punch. And then they go as far to add, and causes an injury. Ilya Lyubushkin was skating away with his back to Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall reached around the side, whether you want to call it a slap, a grab, a punch, whatever, connects with the side of Ilya Lyubushkin's head. Lyubushkin drops to the ice, is unable to get up, leaves the game, does not return. That seems to check all of the boxes. Punches an unsuspecting player or unwilling opponent. Ilya Lyubushkin. Back turns to Taylor Hall. Unsuspecting and unwilling. Taylor Hall reaches around and makes contact with the side of Lyubushkin's head. That is essentially a punch. And causes injury. Ilya Lyubushkin left the game, did not return. That is an injury. This results in a match penalty, which means he gets kicked from the game, and a 1-game suspension ensues. If you don't think this was a sucker punch, if you don't think it was willing of an injury, whatever your personal opinion is of it is, it fits into, at bare minimum, the category written under Rule 46.15 from the Department of Player Safety in the NHL rulebook. Now, here is where the lack of consistency comes in. Dylan Larkin last year was suspended for a sucker punch on Matthew Joseph. He received a hit from Matthew Joseph he did not like, he did not appreciate. He stands up, he sucker punches Matthew Joseph. Matthew Joseph was an unsuspecting opponent, he was an unwilling opponent, and he took a punch. Dylan Larkin was given a match penalty, kicked out of the game, and was suspended. Earlier this season, only about a month ago, Max Pacioretty, following Chris Letang between whistles, grabs Chris Letang's back, punches him in the back of the head, drops him to the ice. Chris Letang, an unsuspecting or unwilling opponent. Max Pacioretty throws a punch. Max Pacioretty receives no discipline. On one hand, you're looking at a guy who does a sucker punch to an unwilling opponent. Kicked out, suspended. Max Pacioretty follows a guy. Sucker punch to the back of the head. No discipline. No penalty. No fine. No suspension. Taylor Hall follows an unsuspecting or unwilling opponent, punches him in the head, injures him, $5,000 fine. George Parros, which one is it? Which one is it? The way that the game is handled, officiated, and supplemental discipline is handed out at this point, it has gotten to a point where it is beyond confusing for players, coaches, management, and fans. The reason that there is so much uproar regarding these incidents, yes, obviously social media allows fans from different fan bases to connect with each other in one place and go back and forth and debate different incidents. I get it. But the confusion between one incident to the next has allowed fans to get to a point where they don't even know what to expect. When you have Leafs fans, who are some of the craziest, most rabid fan base in the entire world, looking at this and genuinely just not knowing. Some people are extremely confused in terms of, why was he fined? Why did he even get anything? He got a 2-minute penalty. Some people are extremely confused that he didn't get suspended. Some people are just confused at what to expect of what's going on. Last night's game, Josh put it best here. We cannot hand out discipline based on injury. I think that that's the right way to look at things. You have to look at the intent, because it gets confusing. What's going to happen here? Did the guy get injured? What if I do the exact same thing to the next guy and he doesn't get injured? Is it going to be handled the same way? I don't know. The NHL and George Parros have continued to make things up as they go along. That is becoming the frustrating and confusing part of things. Today on TSN Radio, Jeff O'Neill claimed that he thinks it should have been capped out at a 2-minute penalty. Earlier in the day, Frank Corrado, also a former NHL player, claimed that he believed it should have been at least a 2-game suspension. These are both former NHL players watching this go down and having completely different opinions. If guys who played the game, guys who were in the league, can't even figure out what's happening, how are the fans of the game supposed to understand? You're trying to grow this game. You're trying to get people to understand. If someone who had turned on the NHL game for the very first time last night saw that, how are they supposed to understand what's going to happen next? They see that play, they see a $5,000 fine, and they go, oh, okay, that's what happens if you do that. Then they see Max Pacioretty do it, and they find out there was no discipline. And then they go, wait a minute, this one might have been worse than the Taylor Hall one. And then you go and watch the Dylan Larkin one. Suspended. Make up your mind, George Peros. You're a joke in that office right now. It's making a complete mockery of the NHL and the NHL's officiating. My first instance looking at this is obviously from a Leafs perspective. I'm a Leafs fan on a Leafs channel. I think there should be discipline. I do. He sucker punched a defenseless player. Regardless of if you think it was a slap, a punch, if you think it was that hard, if you think he should have been injured or not, the intent and what he ended up doing was a sucker punch. It's a dangerous play. We need to protect players. The NHL is beyond confusing. The officiating is beyond confusing. I don't know what to expect from one play to the next. The referees on the ice have become so damn clueless. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody. How are fans supposed to appreciate this game, watch it, and understand what's happening when you in the front office don't even know what's going on? When you in the front office wake up tomorrow morning and see the exact same play and come up with a different result. When you wake up the next day and come up with a different one from the 2 days before. It's unacceptable. The NHL needs to get their act together. Regardless of if fans think this was a fine, a suspension, or should have been left at a 2-minute rough, it doesn't matter. You are sitting in the NHL front office in charge of the Department of Player Safety. Protect the players. If that's a fine, the Dylan Larkin one was a fine. The Max Pacioretty one was a fine. And the next one that comes after that is a fine. But if this happens again and a player gets suspended, you are a clown. This is unacceptable. George Peros has lost his damn mind in that office. I don't know if he ever even had it at this point. Because what he's doing on a day-to-day basis is ridiculous. Read the rule book. Maybe that should help you make your determination of what happened. Max Pacioretty's punch on Chris Letang. Suspend him. Dylan Larkin's punch, leave it at the suspension. Taylor Hall's, give him the suspension. $5,000 fine is a pocket change to these guys. You might as well have done nothing. That guy sneezed this morning and $5,000 fell out of his pocket. George Peros and the NHL Department of Player Safety need to get their act together because this is quickly getting out of hand. The officiating on the ice, the calls after the fact, the discipline, it's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. Ilya Lyubushkin, we hope he's okay in Leafland here. He's a guy who's playing in the top 4 alongside Morgan Riley. Ultimately, I didn't think it was that hard in the moment either. I watched the replays back. I didn't think it was that hard of a punch. Yes, his head did whip a little bit. I don't know if that was necessarily from the punch. Maybe it was partial because who knows? There's guys who have soft chins. There's guys who have weak necks. It happens. When you get a concussion once, you're prone to a concussion the next time. When you get knocked out once, you're prone to the next concussion. These things happen. But this also goes to Josh's point in terms of you can't suspend or fine or hand out discipline based on the result of the play. Because Taylor Hall could have done that to the next guy who's never had any problems before, and the guy turns around and just punches Taylor Hall back. Ilya Lyubushkin happened to get injured on the play. George Peros needs to get his head out of his damn ass and start doing his job properly. Protect the players. That's your job. Guys, let me know in the comments below what you think the results of this should have been. Do you think Taylor Hall deserved a fine? Do you think he deserved a suspension? Should it have been left at a 2-minute roughing? I'm interested to read all the comments after the fact. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I mean, ultimately, I didn't get too much into the fact of whether or not I think it should be. I do believe at least you should have handed out a suspension just in terms of trying to be somewhat consistent in terms of what we saw even from Dylan Larkin last year with the results of that play. And moving forward and how this should be handled in the future, I think that ultimately, no matter what, if you sucker punch a guy, there should be discipline coming from it, especially when you're going from behind the guy and punching him in the side of the head. I do think so, no matter how hard or how soft you hit him. That's kind of my perspective. I get it that maybe it didn't seem that hard. I understand, but I just think that each of these incidences should be handled similarly or the same way. This was just It makes no sense. I'm confused. Let me know in the comments your thoughts below, but ultimately, at the end of the day here, the Department of Player Safety is an absolute clown show in there and what they're doing. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will see you guys tomorrow night after the game against the Winnipeg Jets when Austin Matthews scores his 50th goal of the season. We'll see you guys then. Keep believing.